Good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to God's Answers to Your Questions. Uh, yes, Wednesday. We keep changing the days for these shows, so I never know what day it is. Yes, this is Wednesday. If you have questions or comments today as we go through, please feel free to uh join in with the discussion. Joining me this week is Simon Harris. How you doing, Simon?
Hey CJ, I'm doing good. Hey, I'm glad I'm glad you know my name because you don't know if it's morning or evening and you don't know what day of the week it is. I tell you what,
I'm Steve.
this smoke from Canada must be getting to you pretty hard up there, huh?
Yeah, right, yeah. Glad to see you as always,
Good to
Simon.
see you.
So, before we get started, I'm gonna go ahead and lead us in a word of prayer, and then I'll turn it over to you. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this day. Thank you for this time that we can open up your word and study. Father, please help us to understand your son better through the things that he did and what he taught and his interactions with people. Please bless us today with understanding. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
So,
All right, CJ. So today we're going to have a really familiar miracle. The familiar miracle is going to be Jesus is going to feed a bunch of people with just a little bit of food again. And it's kind of unusual to me that Mark would record two of these miracles that are just so similar. And I think there's a reason. I really think that the beginning of chapter 8 is a new section. And this section is going to really carry us all the way through the end of chapter 10. Um, and again, I've made this comment a couple of times on some of our other shows that we have to remember that while Mark clearly is telling a factual story, he's also got a purpose in mind. And I think even in the letter or in the book is really what it is. He's trying to move us along even in our faith. And so he has told us at the very beginning what the purpose of his book is. You remember what the purpose of his book is?
that we may know that Jesus is the Son of God. He introduces Jesus as the Son of God, and he has been proving that mainly uh, uh, his miracles has been his focus, but also his teachings in there too. Yeah. And we see the reaction of a crowd, when he does a miracle or when he teaches, they're just amazed. And they often ask who this is. And that should slap us in the face with Mark's writing style. Who is this? Who are we dealing with?
Absolutely. And so like I really think, and I don't want to give it away because I think it's going to be fun to wait for it to kind of get there. But I really think that in this section, what Mark is trying to ask us is, okay, I've proven my point, but do you get it? Do you really get what this means? And so I think that the feeding of the 4,000 is the beginning of him asking that question again. So if you remember when we talked about the feeding of the 5,000, I made the point that I think that one of the reasons why that particular miracle is recorded by all four gospels, which is unusual in and of itself, is because the gospel writers want us to understand that Jesus is the creator. So as the creator, that means he has to be God. And so I think Mark is starting here with this story at this point to make that point. And then, of course, Jesus is going to refer to this story as well. So that's enough intro. Let's jump into reading. And since you prayed, I'll go ahead and read first. So I'm going to read 8 to 10. 8 to 10. I'm going to read chapter, because there's a big 8 right there. So I'm going to read verse 1 to 10. In those days, the multitudes being very great and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their own homes, they will faint on the way, for some of them have come from afar. Then his disciples answered him, how can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? And he asked them, how many loaves do you have? And they said, 7. So he commanded the multitude to sit on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves and gave thanks, broke them, and gave them to his disciples to set before them. And they set them before the multitude. And they had a few small fish. And having blessed them, he said to set them also before them. So they ate and were filled. And they took up 7 large baskets of leftover fragments. Now those who had eaten were about 4,000. And he sent them away. Immediately he got into a boat with the disciples, and they came to the region of Dalmantia, however you say that. I am not good at pronouncing these hard places, and I don't even pretend. So, I really don't have a lot to say about this miracle, because everything that I would want to say, I've already said. So let's do this, CJ. I have heard some people try to say that this actually is the same account, that Mark is confused, and so he's recording the same thing just happening. It really happened once. He's just confused and recording it twice.
All right.
So let's think about what are some differences between this story and the other one that kind of helps us know that no, Mark is not confused. This happened twice.
First of all, the number of people, that's a big difference. In chapter 6, we have 5,000 people in verse 5,000 people in verse
9.
In verse 9, and then in verse in chapter 8 we have.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were looking at chapter 8. The number in 6 is 44. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry for messing you up. So 6:44 and 8:9.
So in 6:44 we have 4,000 people. 6:44 5,000 people, and in 8:9 we have 4,000 people. Also, so that's an obvious one. There's 1,000 less people. Not counting women and children. And there's also some smaller details that are different. For example, in 8:6 or 8:7, they had a few small fish and set them before them. Whereas in 6 verse 38, they have 5 loaves and 2 fish. So here in this miracle, we have we have 7 loaves.
That's in verse 6. Yeah.
In verse 6. In the other miracle, we have 5 loaves. in the first miracle, we have 2 fish mentioned, and then in the second miracle, it just says several fish. So that's different. One mentions in Mark 6 that they sit down on the green grass. Mark 8 doesn't include that. Did I? Oh, yes. In Mark 6, we have Jesus looking up to heaven to bless the food. In Mark 8, we don't see that. Uh, and also, afterward, when they're done, the disciples in Mark 6 get 12 left, 12 basketfuls of fragments in verse 42. And in this miracle, they took up 7 basketfuls in verse 8. So those are some distinctions there.
Indeed. I'll add one more at the end of that miracle in Mark 6 and in verse 45. Jesus put his disciples in a boat and sent them ahead, and he stayed behind. And here he gets in the boat with them. Now, if all of that is not convincing to somebody out there, then I would suggest to you that you drop down to verse 19. We'll give a little spoiler here. And Jesus says, when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets did you take up? And they said 12. And then in 20, when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets did you take up? So if Mark was confused, then Jesus was confused too, you know. But I again, I think it is kind of important to see those differences in the details and understand that Mark is making it clear to us these are different accounts altogether. And again, I really think his main purpose here, certainly it follows in line with him recording every other miracle. He wants us to see the greatness of Jesus. He wants us to see that Jesus is God. But I really think it is to set up what happens next.
Yeah.
So do you have anything else that you want to bring out about those 10 verses?
No, what I brought out is, in your question kind of covered where I was going.
Indeed.
Uh,
All right. Let's see. All right. This next section, again, I think this next section is really going to help us appreciate what all this is about. Are you up to reading 13 to 21?
Yes. Are you skipping 11 and 12 on purpose?
Oh, no, I no, I'm not. So let's do 11 and 12 because you're exactly right. My brain skipped a gear. Hey, if you don't know what day of the week it is, I can miss verses 11 and 12.
I guess so, yeah. Then the Pharisees came out and began to dispute with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven. But he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, why does this generation seek a sign? For surely I say to you, no sign shall be given to this generation.
So Jesus just feeds 4,000 people with 7 tortillas. That's what a loaf of bread would have been like. We talked about that when we were in chapter 6. 7 pieces of flatbread and a couple of fish. And these guys show up and say, hey, give us a sign. It's like, are you kidding me? What about the sign that they just saw? What about healing the deaf mute man? What about raising Jairus' daughter? What about healing the man with the withered hand in the Sabbath? What about the demons he's been casting out? Come on, guys. Really? You need another sign?
And I think that's what that sigh's about in verse 12.
Me too.
I mean, he's frustrated.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, when he says no sign will be given this generation, he doesn't mean that he's done with miracles, because that can't be true, because we're going to read about a miracle in just a minute in this same chapter. So I think what he's saying is, in essence, there is no sign I can give you that is going to satisfy you.
And I don't know if this coincides or if this was another time, but if you look at Matthew, he follows up with, he says no sign, and then he follows up with, except the sign of Jonah. I'm gonna give you a sign. I'm not gonna give you a sign that you want, basically. But look at Jonah. And
Yeah.
it's of course pointing to the resurrection. What,
Yeah.
incidentally, Jesus talks about here in chapter 8, verse 31 through 33. We'll get there sometime in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right. And if he didn't say that here at this particular moment, that was clearly something that he did say to them often. Because you also have that in Luke 11:29. And so, that sign of Jonah, of course, relates to him being in the grave for 3 nights and 3 days, and then being raised from the dead. So, and so it's like, all these miracles that he's doing. Well, if none of these do you any good, maybe this one will do you some good. And I think the truth of the matter is, when we get to like Acts chapter 6 and even Acts chapter 15, there's a mention of some Pharisees who have become Christians. Acts 6, you have the mention of some of the priests becoming Christians. So it seems to me like this final sign that Jesus promises about the sign of Jonah, it will turn some hearts, but not everybody's heart. And, CJ, I think that's a really good lesson. I think that's an important thing for us to remember. And this is going to come out again with the rich young ruler, right? And that is that we often think that there's just the right thing to say. If we could just find the right thing to say or the right thing to do, that everybody would believe in Jesus. But Jesus wasn't able to get everybody to believe in him. There's just no satisfying some people. And that's no excuse for us not to try our best and to learn and get better and to do everything that we can. But we have to understand at the end of the day that we're not going to convince everybody. And that's sad, but that is the truth of the matter. All right, so that's all I have on those verses. You got anything that you want to ask or add?
No, just we're gonna see another parallel between at least the structure of chapter 6 and chapter 8 here in this next section, right?
Indeed. All right, so I guess I get to read this big long section.
Yep.
That's how it goes. All right, so I will read 13 to 21. And he left them, and the them there, by the way, just to keep this together, is the Pharisees. So he's walking away from the Pharisees. He gets into the boat again, parting to the other side. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, and they did not have more than 1 loaf with them in the boat. Then he charged them, saying, "Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." And they reasoned among themselves, saying, "It is because we have no bread." But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, "Why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up?" They said to him, 12. Also, when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said, 7. So he said to them, how is it that you do not understand? So again, I think there's a clear connection between 11 and 12 with these verses in 13 through 21. So the Pharisees, they don't get who Jesus is. And that's why they're asking for another sign. So he sighs, he's frustrated with them, right? He gets into the boat with the disciples, he's frustrated, and he says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod. Now, where do we read about Herod in Mark's gospel?
Well, that was back also in chapter 6.
And who did he think Jesus was?
He thought John the Baptist had risen from the dead.
Exactly. So he didn't get who Jesus was. The Pharisees don't get who Jesus is. And so this leaven is that influence. You know, CJ, if I was saying what Jesus said in Simon's way, I would say, don't be stupid like the Pharisees and don't be stupid like Herod. And I think that's really what Jesus means here. You know, we talk about leaven being the influence, don't follow the influence of the Pharisees. But again, I really think he's really saying, these guys don't know who I am. When they should, don't be like them.
Yeah.
But they hear leaven, and what's that make them think?
Food.
Yeah. Oh, man, he's fussing at us because we don't have bread. And so, I just imagine Peter looking at Andrew, and this is totally my imagination, but Peter looking at Andrew and saying, you were supposed to get bread. And Andrew looking at James, no, James, you were supposed to get bread. And then James looking at John, you were supposed to get bread. And John looking at Thomas, no, weren't you supposed to get the bread? You know, and so they're all fussing and worried because they don't have bread. Now, can you just understand how ridiculous that is? Okay, you've seen everything that Jesus had done. So if they've got one loaf of bread, do they have enough bread?
Yeah.
I mean, so even on that score, they've got enough bread because they got Jesus with them who can make more bread from a little bread.
Right.
But they also have been with Jesus long enough that they should understand and appreciate that if Jesus is going to say something, there is a spiritual meaning to it. And they're not getting that spiritual meaning because, I mean, he spoke parables, right? And they were supposed to understand that there was a spiritual meaning to the parables. Yeah. So they should have thought spiritually here and not just about bread. So clearly, they don't understand who Jesus is. Now, if you were to walk up to one of them and say, if you were to walk up to James and say, who is Jesus? What do you think he would say?
Right now or
yeah, so let me rephrase it like this so you'll get where I'm going. So this is after they've been sent out on the limited commission, right? What were they going out and telling everybody in that limited commission about who Jesus was?
He's the Son of God.
Yeah, he's the Messiah. He's the Son of God. He's the Christ. So I'm fully convinced that if you walked up to one of these guys that day and said, who is Jesus? They're going, oh man, he's the Son of God. But I don't think they get what that means.
Right.
And I think that's why he says to them, don't you understand? Why are you worried about bread? Don't you understand? Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? That ties directly back to what he said about why he taught in parables. And so now he's asking them, don't you get what you're seeing? And I'm going to tell you, I think that is the key to understanding this whole section. So Mark using Jesus's words to his disciples is now asking us, do you get what you see? Are you seeing? Are you hearing? Are you understanding? Are you perceiving? There's something even deeper for us to appreciate about what it means that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God.
Right.
But I just love the last little interaction here when Jesus, looks at them. And again, I may be wrong, but in my imagination, and when I read these words, it sounds like he's scolding them, right? So I imagine him speaking in kind of a frustrated, scolding, fatherly voice. When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up? And I imagine them, nobody says anything at first, or finally somebody says, 12? When I fed the 4,000 with the 7 loaves, how many baskets did you take up? 7? And he's like, so how is it then that you don't understand? And I just find that thought to be really humorous when I read that.
Do you think in their mind Jesus has never done something like this before? Taking 1 loaf and dividing it? Because before they've seen him divide 5 and 7, but what about just 1? Do you think that could play into this? They're thinking at least. We
I
don't have enough for Jesus to multiply this.
I don't know. I don't. That's not typically my first thought about that. You could be right about that, but I think he's just making the point that they don't understand what it means to have the Son of God in their boat, and he's just really trying to drive that point home to them. That I think he's trying to get them to appreciate the deeper idea that that his statement, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod, was never about food, but it's about not understanding who Jesus is.
Right.
All right, you have anything else in those verses?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
All right. So with that in mind, with this idea in mind, I think verses 22 to 26 are going to make a whole lot more sense to us when we see what happens. So go ahead and read 22 to 26.
Then he came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. And he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. Then he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up, and he was restored and saw everyone clearly. Then he sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town nor tell anyone in the town.
Okay. So Jesus comes across a blind man. A blind man at Bethsaida was brought to him, and they begged Jesus to touch him, to heal him. And so Jesus does heal this man, but he does it in an unusual way. So in a way, the beginning of it especially kind of reminds us of the way he healed the deaf mute man at the end of chapter 7. First of all, he brings him out of town, and then this spitting on his eye and putting his hands on him kind of reminds you of the same thing that he did with the deaf mute man. And then Jesus asked him if he saw anything. And what did the man say?
I see men like trees walking.
When you read that, like what image comes to your mind? I mean, like when you think about seeing men like trees walking, what do you imagine that to look like?
I imagine, you know what? I always get the picture of an out of focus camera lens. You know, when you look at a out of focus camera lens, you can see some things, but it's all blotchy and blurry, and you can tell that there's someone there, but you can't. You can only see maybe shadows and shapes, and so that's what I see.
Indeed. Because I'm a Lord of the Rings fan, I always imagine like the Ents, you know, the trees that were alive in the book, and how they move real slow, and you know, so their branches are hands, and so the hands look real big, and I see that kind of blurriness as well. Um, and so he didn't see well, right? He didn't see well at all. He saw men like trees walking. Is that better than being blind?
Uh, I mean, yes.
Yeah.
We have a call coming in. I don't. You're on God's answers to your questions.
CJ, you back, Journey. Hold on, Lily.
I,
Wait.
in just a moment. I don't think he that call was for the show.
I
So
got you. Okay. Yeah, it is better, right? I mean,
yeah,
if you're totally blind and now you can see men like trees walking, that's better. But that's not what's best. And so it says that he put his hands on his eye again and made him look up, and he was restored and saw everyone clearly. So you got this two-stage healing. Now, should we believe that Jesus wasn't powerful enough to heal this man of his blindness in one go?
no. I think there's a lesson here for the disciples.
That's exactly it. You know, and again, I mean, I've heard people say that, and I'm like, man, you have the same problem that's being represented in the story if that's what you think. Jesus, he's already healed blind people. He's already raised the dead. You're going to tell me that he can raise the dead? He can heal blind people. He can heal a man who's born blind. He can heal a deaf mute, but he can't heal the blind man? No, absolutely. He's trying to teach something here. Because, and I think you're exactly right. He's teaching something to his disciples. And what he's teaching his disciples is they were seeing spiritually men like trees walking.
And let me just say that is that is a skewed perception of Jesus, yes, but it's still an improvement uh, from the uh, Pharisees who were seeking a sign. They weren't even seeing Jesus. The disciples at least had some clarity of Jesus, but that Peter will even confess that he is the Son of God, he is the Christ in verse 29, but they didn't fully understand what that means.
That's right.
And
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think there's a lesson there. You know, many people may call Jesus the Christ, but they don't really understand what that means or who he is or what that means for my life. Yes, Jesus can. I think this also plays into it. The miracle of the 4,000 again was not for the disciples. Yes, they were part of it, right? They were passing out the loaves, taking up basketfuls, but the feeding of the 5,000 was for the crowd. Now they have one piece of bread, and since it's for them, they almost think, no, it can't happen for us. Jesus can do all these other things for other people, but it can't happen for me. And that's some people's mentality, you know. He's your savior, he's the savior of the world. Yes, but I've done too many bad things, horrible things for Jesus to save me, Jesus to help me.
Yeah, that is truly a false perception who Jesus is. Yeah. So yeah, I really love this section of Mark. I really love this story because again, this blind man is a living example of what the disciples were. They were men who saw trees, men like trees walking, and it's easy for us to be men like trees walk or see men like trees walking as well. And so Jesus doesn't want us to stay there. And so again, I think it's really important for us to see that Jesus healed this man the second time to make sure that he could see clearly. And so that's what Jesus wants. He wants us to see clearly. So he's not going to just be frustrated and cut us off and be done with us. No, he wants us to see men like men, right? And I think that's what Mark is really trying to get across to us here. It's almost like he's asking us the question: do you really see Jesus, or do you see men like trees walking? And this theme is going to be repeated again and again through the rest of chapter 8, in chapter 9, and even into chapter 10. We'll see it. And the way chapter 10 ends is just really so marvelous to me. And so I'm looking forward to getting to that part.
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting. Again, it feels like the farther away you are from Jesus, the more you understand him. Because this blind man sees everyone clearly. Everyone. Who does that include? He saw Jesus clearly.
Yeah.
No, I'm not saying he understood everything. Maybe that's just limited to uh, his physical eyes, but I think there's more to that phrase.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. He's an illustration of that moving towards seeing Jesus more clearly.
Right.
Yeah, I like Curtis's comment there. The miracle is a process, and so is our growth and understanding. And I think that's really important to see as well. That as much as we might think we know Jesus, there's more to learn about Jesus.
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't be satisfied with what we know about Jesus today. We should continue to strive to see him more clearly. I think that's a great point.
That's right. Good point. So, did you have anything else?
No, that's it.
We got 5 minutes, and the next section is pretty important.
Yeah, I think we probably should hold that off until next time. And
Yeah. Well, thank you all for being here, and we look forward to being with you next time. I'm not sure if it will be next week because I will not be here, so we'll we'll keep you posted if we're gonna have a show or not. But if you want to contact us with questions on this text or anything else, comment on God's answers to your questions in my YouTube, or email me at cjmarshall003 00703 at gmail.com. Thank you all, and God bless.
God bless you all.